Who wants to hear about an offensive lineman? I know I do. It's the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and I'm likely the only person that you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center at Ole Miss and worked in the national media for Yahoo Sports. Thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, we talk about Ole Miss trying to add a tackle through the transfer portal and how that's going. Pretty good, I might add. And we also share a heartwarming story of a small school Mississippi kid that may be about to reach his goal. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available in all podcast apps and YouTube. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show possible. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 winning moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, in the early part of the transfer window, people have been hitting me up and it's like, hey, we need this. We all saw the Georgia game. What are we doing offensive and defensive line? And we've been waiting for players to get into the portal, and I think it was Steve Wiltfong that mentioned that this kid was about to visit, and this was, I think, Zach Berry also had something to that effect as well. So Carter Smith is going to visit Ole Miss. He's an offensive tackle, redshirt freshman out of Indiana. He was a four-star recruit out of high school. He's an Ohio kid, but he is visiting and moving quite frequently. Now, if you look yesterday, Lane Kiffin, if that was the player he was seeing in Bloomington, Indiana, he visited Bloomington, Indiana yesterday. So I imagine it was to put the finishing touches up on a visit and try and hammer home this idea. Ole Miss lost the Georgia game the way they lost the Georgia game for two reasons. For starters, because of Jackson Dart getting injured, and that allowed Georgia to separate late more so than before. Not saying that that game was not going to be a blowout. That game was going to be a blowout either way, but it might not have been 52-17. It might have been something a little bit different than that if he would not have gotten hurt at 38-17 or whatever that is. So Ole Miss needed to get better on the line of scrimmages, both offensively and defensively. And we've talked about players on the defensive side of the ball that kind of fits that criteria. And the offensive line names were slow to come by for whatever reasons. They were a little bit slow to come by. Now they're starting to trickle in. You had some interior offensive linemen. I think Jerquan Scott from USM is in there. Memphis has put a couple of interior offensive linemen in the portal. This is the first tackle name that we have actually heard. His name is Carter Smith. He is like I said, a redshirt freshman. He was a four-star recruit, top 250 player in the country coming out of high school. 6'5", 304 pounds. He apparently played a good bit of time this season. He got a good bit of playing time, so it's not going to be a completely green player that you have coming in if you get that transfer. And I do think this is absolutely hilarious, by the way. He was a four-star prospect 2 years ago, but because he's transferring in Indiana, he's naturally just a three-star prospect now. There's nobody actually breaking down films of these players. They're all making assumptions. This is the PFF of college football at the moment, is people rating transfer portal entrants. You have somebody like Florida State had one of the best defensive lines that college football has seen, and it was players that was playing like FCS ball, like Jared Verse or something like that. In other words, they're too lazy to know this. There's not enough people to have this. They have to do it because everybody needs the stars, and it's a conversation starter. But don't focus too much on that. Focus on the fact that he's a good player. He's played a good bit of football, and he's being recruited as somebody that can come in and play right away. Absolutely fantastic football player. His visit will be over the course of the weekend. This is going to be a decent transfer portal weekend. And Ole Miss is doing a fantastic job in the portal and bringing in good players. And the reason for that happening, and I did a show with Pratt Rogers last night, and I brought this up, and it was on my live stream, and I'm going to hammer home these points because looking at Ole Miss's football season, there's one of two thoughts that you can have. And the only way you can get to those thoughts is if your introductory thoughts was something else. We have all heard me over the course of the last year talk about this year's team being the most talented team that Ole Miss has had in my lifetime. Ole Miss won a whole bunch of close games to where they were able to out-talent people and do to other teams what other teams have done to Ole Miss was able to do it to them. And they were able to win fourth quarter games because they had better football players. That is my theory on that. Everybody saw it. But if you went into this season saying, okay, Ole Miss is going to go 6-6, this is same old Ole Miss teams with no knowledge or awareness of how talented these players are, or you don't think they're talented, you would look at this 10-2 season as the luckiest season that Ole Miss could possibly have ever had. That is the way it is. You're going to ignore the fact that Ole Miss held nearly 6 teams to under 300 yards of offense, and you're going to focus on the Georgia game. You are going to ignore the fact that Jackson Dart was one of the most explosive players in the Southeastern Conference in yards per play, and you're going to focus on the fact that against Georgia and Alabama, the offense didn't look right. It is a subjective opinion, but I just wanted to let everybody know where I am coming from, despite what you're going to hear from other people. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying they're right. This is an opinion. That's the benefit of opinion. It can't be proven. Some people's opinion might be that the committee got this absolutely right. You can't say that out loud because that looks like you're talking down on Florida State, and you need to virtue signal that Florida State got screwed. Florida State did get screwed, but the committee got it right. Alabama playing Michigan in the first round game is going to be the most watched football game in college football history. Florida State was never getting in over that Alabama team. Florida State would have probably gotten in over other teams, but they weren't getting in over Alabama. And that's just a realistic thing. If you want to be real, be real. And that's the real. So it's a combination of most deserving and best, but in the reality is they're going to put the games together. They're going to be the best way to get the best television ratings and the most money coming in. That's the way that's going to work. But as I was saying, Ole Miss had all that talent, and they did all of that talent in the offseason. They were able to pull away and win close games and win games that they would normally lose. We all know that. That was with them recruiting the way they did. The heavy use of the transfer portal and stuff like that. They have a well-run collective, all of that stuff. But why was Ole Miss able to do that? Because Lane Kiffin is an early adopter, and he understands that talent needs to be brought in, okay? The best talent that he can get. And he's been able to do that and accumulate those players over 3 years. To where this year you were able to do that fourth quarter type stuff. Here's the kicker. This year is the first year that Lane Kiffin can recruit to the playoff. For years in this playoff system, and it caused it to have less and less parity in college football. There was only like 6 or 7 teams that could potentially recruit for the playoffs. Ole Miss was not one of them. Ole Miss was going to lose a recruiting battle to them every single time. And all of the other 125 teams were kind of put in the not playoff category. This year with the 12-team playoff, Ole Miss is clearly in the running for that. They're probably one of the favorites to get in. And if Ole Miss wins their bowl game, they're looking at coming in as a home playoff game favorite. Probably not a bye team for the playoff. They're not looking at somebody that's going to win the SEC, but they have a decent chance to get into the tournament. And they can recruit to that. And transfer portal players coming in are going to focus on that. A player might have a price tag, and this is just a hypothetical thing, it's like a player might have a price tag of 1.5 million, but that might be 1.5 million, say, for Vanderbilt. Ole Miss might be able to get him for 1 million because Ole Miss has a chance to add winning to the equation. That makes the collective more valuable, more effective, because you can talk about playoff and you can talk about winning as a possibility for somebody that might be coming in for 1 year. Ole Miss is going to be in on a lot of big name players because of that equation. The Grove Collective is going to become much more effective and much more powerful because you can add the winning component to that as well. You might have the same player, right? And the two schools that are recruiting that player is Mississippi State, Southern Miss, and Ole Miss. And the way this will work, and this is just the way it is, because of that winning equation, Ole Miss might be able to get that kid for $500,000. Mississippi State would be able to get that kid for $750,000. And Southern Mississippi would have to offer $1 million for that same kid. Winning does matter. It's not all about money. Money still matters, but money only matters enough to where you're being comfortable with what's going on and you get to have the best year possible because nobody likes to lose. Look at what's happening at Vandy. Vandy is getting their collective together. They're building their stadium. They're still having an exodus like nothing we have seen because everybody hates losing. So understand that equation is changing a little bit as well. We are just getting started on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day. Visits are cranking up, and Ole Miss got one from a safety midweek, and we'll talk about that next. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers to stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet win. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so we talk about an offensive lineman coming in and Ole Miss being able to be definitely in these transfer portal games because of they get to recruit to the playoff. That is a major deal. You're probably not going to hear it from other people, but that is a major deal as well. Now, Ole Miss got a visit midweek this week from Key Lawrence. Key Lawrence is a safety from Oklahoma. He's originally from Innsworth High School in Nashville, Tennessee. Good football player. He started a couple years here, started his career at Tennessee. So I think this is going to be a grad transfer type situation. Good football player. His playing time at Oklahoma dwindled a little bit towards the end, but I think that's because they're just building for the future. They're trying to get completely SEC ready and ready to go. And I don't know if they thought Key was the avenue to get there. And in a Brent Venables defense, it might be a little bit different than what he had before. But Key Lawrence in a safety position. Now, we all need to know Dejon Anthony, we don't know what's going on with him. He might decide to step away. We don't exactly know what's happening with Trey Washington. I'm assuming he's going to be back. Ishim Young was removed from the team and is in the transfer portal at the moment. So Ole Miss is having needs in the back five of the defense. And this is a player that Key Lawrence can help this team out. He visited midweek. We saw Jonathan Hess post about this kid. Like I said, Key Lawrence is from Nashville, Tennessee. He went to Innsworth High School. He's 6'1", 205 pounds. He was a four-star high school, top 100 prospect. So he's an athletic guy, and he will provide a need, at least as somebody, if you're trying to find those 22 players that can take advantage of what's happening defensively, I think Key Lawrence will provide an avenue for some depth at the minimum, and maybe even for starting in that position. And like I said, it depends if John Saunders comes back. It depends on if Trey Washington comes back. You want some of those players to come back, but it'd be nice to have somebody with that level of experience playing on the back end, especially if Deshaun Anthony does not return back to Ole Miss. Key Lawrence is a good football player. He had 3 interceptions, about 30 to 40 tackles per year, and playing at Oklahoma, it was pretty good. I think he's just taking advantage of this to try and get a little bit closer to home. Oxford's about 4 hours. If he goes to Ole Miss, Oxford's about 4 hours close to Nashville. I mean, obviously he could go to Vandy. He could go to MTSU. Those would be pretty close schools as well. Memphis would be pretty close. And obviously, any kid from Tennessee, you wonder if Tennessee is actually going to pop up and be in the conversation, even though he left Tennessee originally. I think that's a situation that we probably need to pay attention to. But really, really good football player, defensive back, safety. He's going to demand a lot of attention, and Ole Miss is giving him a lot of attention. So this is another example of Ole Miss being able to recruit to the playoff. And honestly, that's going to be a situation to where you might, like Walter Nolan is not officially in the playoff right now. Okay. Well, Walter Nolan is not officially in the playoff. And that's important to know. So, but that type of player is the type of player that Ole Miss has a puncher's chance with. It's not just every player is going to go to A&M and Texas and USC and Ohio State and all of those places that have a ton of money. Ole Miss has a puncher's chance because of that playoff. And the small but mighty Grove Collective, as Walker Jones said on our program, it has a chance to be a little bit more mighty because of what this team has built itself to. College football is a unique game, everybody. It's a unique game to where the better you get, the easier it gets. Nothing is harder than what Vandy is going through right now, and they've been going through for the last 60 years. Nothing is quite that hard to build your way out of that and get to the point where winning is a consistent thing. It is much more easy at Notre Dame. It is much more easy at Oklahoma. And now in the NIL world, you got Texas, you have USC, those places to where they can get players in there. And people that think it's not just the Jimmies and the Joe, it's the Jimmies and the Joes, not the X's and the O's. People that believe that, they're going to think it's going to be all about NIL. But that's not necessarily the case. I think this equation is much more complex than we're willing to let on, even in this day and age. It's so easy to say that this kid just went here because of money. Honestly, it's the same argument that they did even before NIL. Oh yeah, we all know there. It's like, oh yeah, they bought him. Stuff like that. I think the equation is far more complex than just money. I think money factors in, but I think that major college football teams, a lot of them are equitable when it comes to money. So you still have to do old-fashioned recruiting type stuff. Your uniform still matters. Your stadium still matters. Your facility still matters. And how you're going to be able to win. The Bama standard, I think the Bama standard is the fact that recruits know they're going to win at a high level. So you don't have to worry about that. You can just focus on yourself and developing yourself, and the winning is going to kind of take care of itself because they're just so good. And Vandy, the whole thing is like you can have the best stadium, you can have the best facilities, the money can be equitable. There's just all of the losing that Vanderbilt has to deal with, and those recruits is going to make them hard to get those recruits. Once you get down into that position, it is really, really hard to get yourself out of it again. It is just a really, really weird situation, and I'm interested to see, A, how Vandy is going to do with it, and B, how Ole Miss can deal with the fact that they get to recruit. They get to play the game with the big table. They get to sit at the grown-up table for the first time in my lifetime. That is the waters they're swimming in right now. Still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. A Mississippi small school kid may have just had the best day of his life. And I'll let you know what he did to earn it, and we'll show you that next. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It is just you versus the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you can simply pick more or less than 2 to 6 players and watch the stat projections and the winnings roll in. With basketball season here, now you can pick combo projection across football and basketball in the Specials League. It's a league specifically created for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce at 2.5 combos of 3 points made and receptions. You pick more or less than that. You want to play alongside rappers and comedians. Some of PrizePicks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Andrew Schultz are available in the Community Plays tab under the Promos tab under the app to view the entry of some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use code LockedOnCollege for the first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. And shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Be part of history. All right. Really kind of a cool story. And I know people that are looking at stars and offers and things like that, they're going to freak out. But I just don't think you need to do that in this situation. There's a player from Velma Jackson that's in 1A high school in, I think, Canton, Mississippi, that put up some phenomenal numbers this season. Here you go. He had 185 carries, nearly 2,100 yards, had nearly 400 yards receiving, kick return and punt return was fine, nearly 3,000 all-purpose yards, 48 total touchdowns. Fantastic player. And he had one of the best games in a state championship game, not including Suntaran Perkins, because that's in a class by itself, but it was close. This player in Oxford in the state championship game, in a game that they lost, by the way, had 320 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns. And it wasn't a situation to where he had like a big half or he blew up. He had 160 yards in the first half and 3 touchdowns, and the rest in the second half and 3 touchdowns. It was like 160 yards and 152 yards is like the realm that he is in. But he was offered by Ole Miss. He finally got it. And his offer list right now, going into that, is Ole Miss and then the HBCUs, Valley, Jackson State, and Alcorn offering, and the Mississippi Junior Colleges offer him. He's a 5'9", 190-pound running back. And let's look at the highlights real quick. And this is from his game in Oxford. One thing you'll notice about this football player is his lateral movement is elite. I'm not saying he's a super terrific player or anything like that. I'm not saying that this kid deserves his 5th star right now. That's not what I'm getting at. But I'm going to tell you why the tools exist, why Ole Miss offered him to begin with. 5'9", 190 pounds. He reminds me a little bit of Matt Jones, if you want a little bit of a comp. And he's going to put on some weight in college. But his lateral movement and his quickness in 10 yards and his vision and balance, excellent. This is the reason that he doesn't have the offers he has. His top end speed is not the greatest in the world. It is somebody that if he breaks away, he is going to make it to 20 yards and you're not going to catch him. But after 20 yards, the gas gets out of his tank pretty quick and you're able to run him down. He's not going to break any long runs, but he has made a living in 1A out-visioning people, out-balancing people, out-lateral moving people to the tune of about 12 yards per carry. And this is somebody that is at least worth a shot, honestly. He has accepted an invitation at the Army All-American Bowl, which is not the Army All-American Bowl that everybody remembers, is the game that is in Frisco, because the one that's in San Antonio, that what used to be the Army All-American Bowl is just now the All-American Bowl. So we'll get to confusion season as it gets a little bit later. But the one that's in Frisco, he has accepted an invite for that. Good football player, absolutely deserving what he did. He came to Oxford, Mississippi in front of all of those eyes that are watching games to try and see players that might be worth bringing in under your umbrella. Kevin Smith is in Oxford, put his own eyes on him. He put up 320 yards. He put up 6 touchdowns in a losing effort. The sting of that state championship game, that loss probably is gone almost immediately. Really, really good football player. And I'm proud that he got that offer. Like I said, he may never play a snap at Ole Miss. But in the age of the transfer portal, it'll be nice that he gets that film to where he can lay down some stuff to, even if he moves on to a USA, if that's where he ends up, that's fine. If he makes it at Ole Miss, great. He could turn out to be a fantastic player that is, one of those surprise, one of those fantastic stories. Heck, we're talking about it right now. If it goes to the next level, that's where it is. And he is going to be a 3-star recruit once these sites recruit him, once he gets put in. And we'll get to see exactly how Gavin Griffin does. Like I said, he's 5'9", 190 pounds. And if you saw his film, his lateral movement and his vision, pretty good. Now, he's playing against 1A competition. But I think he just deserves a chance. He deserves a shot. And I think he's earned that, averaging nearly 12 yards per carry in high school football. That's hard to do. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. Good for him indeed. And I hope that he gets that shot and he takes that shot if he chooses Ole Miss. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers, we get into that recruiting mindset some more with the portal and high school recruiting. We also talk about Peach Bowl and Chris Beard's run. Also, my mom's in town this week, so it might be a little bit thin over the weekend and a little bit thin on Monday night. So be wary about that. She is here until Tuesday, and we'll Shark Tank Live and be back to business as usual on with Shark Tank Live on Thursday. This is my family Christmas, so kind of be patient with that. After that, it's all transfer portal. It's all Under Armour All-American game. It's all Peach Bowl. Let's go. So I hope everybody enjoys that. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts on Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Anyway, hotty toddy.